session today, we're going to take a look at introduction to data analytics. That is, we'll be taking a look at what exactly is data analytics, what are the career prospects available within it, why is it very important right now, how do we learn it, where is it being used in the real world right now, can we look at a few things, can we figure out what tools we need to learn, can we figure out what software, what techniques we need to work on. So to all these questions, we'll try to find answers in the session today. Now, most of my session will not be only presentation. It will rather be a digital board where I will try to work through and show a few things to all of you participants. So one thing I would always ask and suggest is any queries you may have, feel free to put it in the chat box. I will do my best to go through them and respond accordingly. And we'll try to have an interactive conversation more than anything. So we can mutually try to work on this and try to get to learn a lot of things. So let's take a look at this. Now, before we start to look at the definition of what is data analytics, a lot of things come to our mind. Like we have heard of things like data scientist, data analyst, machine learning, artificial intelligence, deep learning. All these words come up together. We'll start thinking and wondering like which is related to what comes under what. If I want to go through and make a career in data analytics, if I want to become a data analyst, let's say in corporate, or if I want to pursue, let's say, my research within data analytics, like what exactly do I do? Do I learn machine learning? Do I work on data cleaning? What exactly am I supposed to focus on? So these are some confusions which we initially have when we start looking at these. Now, to understand what is data analytics, I want to provide one or two examples so that we get a clear idea first. Now, before we go on to what exactly is data analytics, I hope you have all used apps like Spotify. You may have gone through these apps where you basically get recommended music. You listen to one song or you like one artist, and the app automatically recommends what other song or artist that you may like. Or you may even think of websites like Amazon, Flipkart, or any other e-commerce site that you'll go through, where we often check, and anything we want to buy, we get something very similar. Like if you're about to buy a mobile phone, it will automatically suggest to you a case or a screen guard or screen protector for the same mobile phone. So all of these are something we may have observed a lot. We generally observe all of these on a daily basis. All of these are done using data analytics itself. I'll take a couple of other real world examples, which I feel are the most important real world examples as of today. That is, first thing, many of you may have observed this, many of you may have noticed this. Within news, you will keep checking, you will keep going through news articles, you'll keep going through news, and you will see that when it comes down to particularly, let's say, two things we get to see in news more often than anything else. So one of them is about your climate change that's coming up right away, and the other thing that we often see is about COVID. Now, if you look at this climate thing, many of you may have observed there was this IPCC report, like which was recently given. Now, how exactly do they figure out? How exactly do these organizations figure out what will be the temperature 10 years later on? What will be the amount of ice in Arctic 20, 30 years down the line? How are they figuring all of this out? Again, using huge amount of data. So all the data, that is carbon emissions in the world, sunlight, and all different emissions of various, let's say, for instance, greenhouse gases and so on. All of these years worth of data, years and years and decades worth of data is taken, where the data itself comes out to be in terms of terabytes. So these data, this complete data is taken up, the data is clean, the data is analyzed, and then they come up with a final chart, a visualized way. Always the final result is in a visualized form. I'll be explaining why we do that. A visualized way to show that at the end, how exactly will be the temperature rise in a graph or in a global map where each country will be there and some colors will indicate what will be the temperature of the country, either green or orange or red or something like that. Similarly, you may have observed in the news a lot as of late, where they always try to predict when could the next wave come up. I think this has been going on since a year now. So when could the next wave come up? And they're trying to predict as of now. They're trying to predict that by August end it may start, by September middle it may peak, and then by something like October it may go down and everything. And all of these are put in these kind of visualized way. So we can see that data is used in a huge way everywhere towards the solution of the biggest problems in the world. That is these two, which currently are considered to be the biggest problems in the world. To every solution, to every little solution, even in various cities, countries, and everything, to figure out sea level rise, whatever it could be. Towards everything, we use previous data, we analyze this previous data, and then we come up with insights. We come up with valuable insights which may help either improve our business, whether in case of, let's say, Spotify or Amazon or something like that, or it may help benefit the society to make informed decisions if it's something like climate or COVID or something like that. Now, before we go ahead and define what exactly is data analytics, identify how data analytics is different than data science, machine learning, and everything, I want all the participants to just think for a few seconds and see what other real life application you may have observed. Like it could be anything, like it could be something, let's say, like Spotify, or let's say Amazon. It could be any of these. So what do you think? Have you seen any real world applications when it comes down to data science or data analytics around you? You guys can put it in chat. You can feel free to put any of these real world applications that you may have observed onto chat. So absolutely right. We have got a few of them. Absolutely perfect. Glad to hear we are getting a lot of different answers. That's amazing. So as one of you rightly pointed out, things like especially Instagram and stuff. So a lot of times you go through some website, you try to buy something. The moment you try to buy something, you close that website, you open Facebook instead, you're going to get the advertisement of the same thing using different apps and different companies and different ads. So all of these are correlated. Weather prediction, absolutely right. So it takes huge amount of previous data. This is one of the biggest applications even till date, because a lot of government agencies, including Indian Meteorological Agency or including NASA space agencies, all of these big government organizations invest a lot of money to predict weather and make better decisions to save thousands and thousands of lives. So yes, COVID predictions, or yes, some music apps like this, absolutely right. So we can see data analytics in real life in a lot of these examples. So now we understood, now we have just got an idea like what exactly are the applications of data analytics. Let's take a look very quickly to identify what is data analytics, how is data analytics, different from all the other concepts, that is data science and machine learning and everything. So to begin with this, the first thing that I want to point out, in all of these applications that we saw, initially it starts with previous data. We'll have huge amounts of data. So data analytics is, some call it as a field, some call it as a process. I personally prefer to call it as a process where we take up data in its raw format. I always prefer to say in its raw format, because in no real world application, we will ever be getting data the way it is supposed to be to directly put within a machine learning algorithm or a deep learning algorithm to create a model. We will never, 99% of the time in the real world, we will never be getting the data in the right format that we can directly use in some data analytics. We need to first put the data in the right format. We need to clean the data, organize the data, figure out which part of the data is required, which part of the data is not required, where some data is missing, how can we replace it, how can we change it, how can we modify it. All of these things have to be done. So once this is done, once we have taken the raw data, cleaned it in the right way, then we need to use different methodologies to perform analytics on the data, or in other words, analyze the data. So to analyze the data, there are different tools available and there are different methods available. We're going to take a look at which are the tools, which are the methods, how you can do this. So if you already have some experience with some tools, how you can go ahead with this. We're going to take a look at all of these. Now, once we have performed the analysis based on the tools and methods, then we're going to take that resulting data and we have to provide it to our stakeholders. So we have to provide it to the policy makers. Now, think of this. Take a look at this. Earlier, a few minutes ago, I just stated that visualization is a big part of this. Now, why is visualization a big part of this? So let me answer. Think of this. Think of, let's say, climate change. All right. Now, currently we are in 2021. Now, assume that the scientists have predicted data, that is, let's say climate change data, temperature and everything, from 2021 up to 2100. Let's assume up to 2100. Now, if that is put up in an Excel file, that is day by day data or month by month data, how useful is this to policymakers? How useful is this to all the policymakers to make decisions? Because they are getting millions or thousands and thousands of rows of data where they cannot sit through and go through every row of data to figure out what to do. If the same thing, if the same data can be put up in a simple line graph or line chart, as we may say, where we can figure out what exactly is the current temperature, what exactly is the current temperature, how is it gonna go maybe in 2100 from 2021 by using temperature on x-axis or something like that. If this is done, you're basically representing thousands and thousands of rows of data in a very simple and easy form that any person, any policymaker, or anyone who may not have too much time, or anyone who wants to just look at it and make a decision can make that decision. So this is why I personally suggest, or I would always personally state that all of these are equally important parts of data analytics. The first thing is obtaining the data. So without data, of course, there's no analytics. So that's the most important part. Once we have obtained the data, the next thing is to clean the data to make it in the right format so that we can perform the analytics. So once it is cleaned, then you perform your analysis using certain tools and techniques, which we'll take a look at. And finally, once done, we have to visualize the result so that the policymakers or the stakeholders can make informed decisions regarding the same. So everywhere you see in real life, we do this. Take, for example, go to the NASA website, you will see tens and tens of charts showing carbon emissions, Arctic ice sheet melting data, all of this. All of this are shown in graph. They don't show it in like Excel files. Go on to Google and check, just search COVID in some particular country. They'll show it in a graph. They're showing basically thousands and thousands of rows of data in just one graph, which is easier for us to understand and make decisions. Take stock market or take any of these, for example. So this is where you get to see that data analytics is the process where we obtain the data, clean it, analyze it, and provide a visualized result to make informed decisions, in short. Now comes a very important question. Okay, now I understood what is data analytics. In that case, what's the difference between a data analyst and, between a data analyst and the data scientist? Like, what exactly is the difference? Is it the same? Is there a difference? Let's think about this. So the main thing is that data analytics or data analyst works on data analytics and data scientist works on data science. Now that doesn't give us much information. That really doesn't give us much information. It just gives like the name of the domain. So what exactly is it that a data analyst does? What exactly is it that a data scientist does? A data analyst's main job role, if we are looking at, let's say, career-wise, let's say you want to make a career out of this and you want to know which of these you want to go for, because both of them are very much related. Both of them have the same underlying concepts, but there are slight differences. Data analyst, the main work of any person hired in this particular role will be to create visualized responses from available data. So what happens here is there will be some questions that a company will ask. There will be some questions like some particular organization will ask you. Based on that questions and the data provided, you need to create a visualized result so that they can make informed decisions based on the question they have asked. Like, for example, the government of a particular country will ask a data analyst to go through past 300 days of data, COVID data, and identify whatever unique patterns that may be available. Once it is done, visualize it, create a visualized response so that the government can make informed decisions on what kind of lockdowns to make up and everything like that. So I have one of you saying that scientists make predictions based on inferences, analyzes data for identifying patterns and make inferences with visualizing data. Absolutely perfect. That's absolutely perfect. So what data analyst does is they make data-driven strategic decisions, which can help an organization make the right decision. Whereas on the other hand, a data scientist, the general work is to take up the data and perform continuous monitoring with it. That is, a data scientist will keep working on the data continuously using various models, various machine learning algorithms, which may also be used by data analysts in order to optimize various things. So the main difference lies in this. And another thing that we need to know is whether it's a data analyst or data scientist, they both recognize and work on same tools. They both recognize and work with same techniques most of the time. So let us take a look at this. Let us take a look at this in a little more detail. So with this, what we have just seen is that data analytics is a process where we explore the data, analyze the data, and we find patterns within the data. so that we can discover correlations if possible and develop insights which can help make, again, informed decisions as always. Now, we have also looked at what are the steps required. So we've also taken a look at this. That is, first thing for a data analyst is to identify or understand the problem. Like as we pointed out, think of the problem of COVID prediction. So once a data analyst understands what is it that they're supposed to do, then they collect the data, then they clean the data in the right format, in the right required format, and they perform data exploration and analysis only on the clean data, and they interpret results in a visualized format. That's the basic idea. Now, within this, we get to see that there are a lot of different kinds of data analytics or analysts, or in other words. So when you talk about data analytics, you may have heard that there are a lot of different types of data analysts that companies have, or there are different ways to perform data analytics. One of them is descriptive data analytics. Another is diagnostic data analytics, and predictive data analytics. So these are kind of like the three main divisions. There's also prescriptive data analytics. I'll be giving you a brief on all of these so we can have a good idea on what each one is and where do we use them, how do we use them, and so on. So descriptive data analytics is a simple way to look at what happened in the past and taking that data. It's just determining and describing what has happened and explaining it in a very detailed, descriptive way. So a lot of descriptive analytics or descriptive statistics works on only past data to find patterns. We are not predicting anything. We are not figuring out anything. We are not saying like, I want to know what is the, let's say, COVID, let's say, for example, cases in the future or something like that. No, we're not doing any of that. We're just taking past data and analyzing it for insights. That's it. So one of the examples that I'll be taking throughout the session here is going to be on climate data itself, because it's hugely widely available and it's something that we can easily understand and analyze as well. So in descriptive analytics, since it's worked on past data, historical data, we do not try to establish any cause and effect relationships or anything like that. Descriptive statistics is just about describing what happened in the past in a way where we can identify patterns. Like, for example, over the past, there has been, let's say, tens and tens of, I think everybody knows that since around the age of 1850 or 1860 or something like that, all data recording was basically started, because earlier, prior to that, in a lot of cases, data was not recorded. So since the day of data recording till today, whatever is the climate change data that they have recorded, they're going to go through that, they're going to analyze it, and they're going to visually present it in certain graphs to identify patterns of the past. That's it. They just want to identify patterns of the past and see how it has changed, how it has worked. That's all. What has been done in the past. That's basically it. That is called descriptive analytics in short. Next, the next part from descriptive analytics, the next thing that we go through is called diagnostic analytics. Now, you may have heard, like in a lot of cases, the doctor has diagnosed the patient with certain so-and-so and everything like that. So for instance, this is where you start to look at correlations. This is where we start to take a look at correlation. Like, for example, in descriptive data analytics, all that, let's assume in descriptive data analytics, all that has been done is just two graphs. One is, let's say, CO2 emissions. Another is, let's say, number of hurricanes. So you're just taking this data, like what is the CO2 emission of the past data and how many hurricanes came up in the past years. You're just finding out this data and just finding out the patterns. That is your descriptive analytics. Diagnostic analytics is where you see correlations. Absolutely right. Seeing relationship among data. Perfect. So in this, you take a look at this. You try to find out if there is a correlation available between this. Based on increase of CO2 emissions, is there an increase in hurricanes that are happening around the world? So you start to take a look at this. There will be some outliers here and there and everything. That's always existing. Real world data, you can never expect it to be linear. It will always be non-linear. But this is what we will take a look at and understand. So and this is generally done. All of these things, which is finding relationships and everything, all of these are generally done by using, let's say, time series analytics, which is done most of the times using regression and so on. We're going to take a look at all of that in just a while, but I'm just pointing it out as of now. So once you got your diagnostic analytics done, the next thing is to figure out what is predictive analytics. Now, what exactly is predictive analytics here? As the name suggests, pretty simple. We're just trying to figure out what happens in the future. So CO2 emissions till date are like this. What happens in the future? So we try to predict different things over here. That's basically all that it does. So this helps figure out what exactly happens in the future and take the right decision. And again, there's a reason why I'm taking climate example as the first most example. So in this, if scientists take a look at this, then scientists generally come up with, let's say, all the stakeholders, that is government agencies across each nation, and they ask them to take a decision like cut down carbon emission within certain year, and this will help ensure that the world won't be uninhabitable and so on. So they make all these decisions based on that. So whether it is this or whether it is figuring out when the next peak may occur, or whether it is figuring out in a simple thing using some data like on which day should I sell my stock, or all of these. So this is done by using predictive analytics. And once predictive analytics is done, the final thing is called prescriptive analytics. A lot of us may not have heard of this. What exactly is prescriptive analytics? Let's take a look at this. Prescriptive analytics builds on top of predictive analytics. Now, each one builds on top of the previous one over here. So in prescriptive analytics, what we do is we learn, analyze, and figure out based on each scenario, which may be the right decision, which may be the most impactful decision. So it's all about finding out the right decision using a lot of techniques like machine learning and so on. Like, for example, we predict. In predictive analytics, we predict if it goes like this, hurricanes may go like this. If it goes like this, hurricanes may start to slowly go down or something like that. We try to predict all of this. In that case, prescriptive analytics is where you prescribe. At the end, just like a visit to a doctor, you go ahead, you describe that you're feeling unwell, the doctor will diagnose you with something, then they will predict that it may get better within 4 or 5 days, and they will prescribe certain medicines for it. Same way here, we describe the previous data, and then we find out correlation between the previous data, how they are correlated. Based on that, we predict what will be the future data if it goes in the same way. According to that, we will prescribe what will be the right decision to take up in order to go to the most impactful or the most efficient solution. So that is exactly what is the difference between all these 4 types of data analytics. I hope that has been very clear for us, so we can have a good idea on which one we want to work through, which one we want to go through in detail. I hope that is giving us a very clear idea. I have one question. Is data science same as data analytics? They're very similar, but they are not the same. See, as pointed out before, the main difference is data scientist always works on processes, that is devising models. See, I'll just give you this solution, simple thing. A data analyst will just take the input, apply some techniques after cleaning the data to visualize and give the output in the right format. Whereas a data scientist will mainly work on applying these techniques, not just applying these techniques, but create custom techniques, create customized technologies, fine tune algorithms, or create different sort of machine learning models which can improve accuracy and efficiency and everything. So a data scientist works on this part of it more, whereas the data analyst works on cleaning of the data, visualizing the data more. So both of them are very, very closely related, but the only difference is data analyst works on the first part, that is obtaining the data, cleaning, analyzing, whereas data scientist mainly works on taking the data, performing analysis using certain techniques of machine learning, deep learning, transfer learning, whatever it could be, and provide the visualization. So I hope that's very simple and gives a bird's eye view of what it is and what is the difference in short. And based on this, you can also see that the tools that a data analyst uses sometimes are different from the tools that a data scientist uses. A data analyst may also require things like Excel. Like when I say things like Excel, I don't mean the software. What I mean is good knowledge about it. Because a data scientist job will also require the data scientist to clean the data. So it could be Excel, it could be things like SQL, how to read data from there, how to perform analysis from it and everything, how to clean the data from all these, how to retrieve particular set of data only from all of these. These become important part over here. Whereas on the other hand, a data scientist mainly works on your machine learning, artificial intelligence, and so on. So that is the major difference. But sometimes data scientists may also require them, sometimes data analysts may also require them. So I hope that gives a very clear idea of what exactly is the difference. So thanks for asking that important question. So Manish, you can please let me know by one text if it is clear or if you still have any other question regarding the same on your mind. Now, okay, glad to hear that it's clear. Very glad to hear that. So let's move ahead from here and take a look at this. So till now we have understood this. Till now we have seen like data analytics. We use it for like everything, whether it is security purposes to detect, to predict something, future sales, future purchasing behavior, or to identify customer engagement and so on, or even things like healthcare and so on. So everywhere we basically use it. Now, before we go on to understand about the tools that we need to learn, before we learn about the career prospects, before we learn about, let's say, research prospects, let's take a look at a couple of case studies so that we can have a really good idea on how we use this. Now, take this scenario. This is one of the case studies which most of us are very familiar with. This is one of the things which many of us are familiar with. So I'll just take this scenario. Netflix. Now, we know all of us would have watched streamed movies one time or the other. Now, in Netflix, people don't use Netflix only to watch certain movies. They use Netflix to find out the recommended movies that Netflix provides so that they can watch them. So a big part of the business model within Netflix as well as Spotify, similarly, is recommendation. Now, how does it create recommendations? How does it do that? Again, it all starts with data collection. whichever company it may be, everything starts with data collection. Netflix has 180 million plus subscribers. That's a huge amount of data. Imagine having data of, I have, can you tell us about open source tools that can be used for analytics? Absolutely. So there are a lot of open tools that we use particularly for analytics, which we'll be going through immediately after this case study. So to go and learn about what tools we can use, let's take a look at this case study first. So as the case study suggests, I'll quickly go through this so we can directly go for tools immediately. So the first thing we can see and observe is that the data collection is the important part for you to predict. And when you collect data, that is when Netflix collects data, they're collecting every data in Excel. That is so that you can download them either in Excel or in your NoSQL format, either one of them. So in data collection, you're going to be receiving the data of when a person pauses a movie, when a person resumes watching a movie, has a person watched the movie entirely, if the person watched the movie entirely, which is the next movie they're watching. All of these individual data points are taken for 180 million plus members, and this data will be given to you as a data analyst. So your work is to recommend to the user which is the next movie they may want to watch. So this data might not be useful in its own way. You may need to clean it, you may need to modify it, you may need to edit it. So the first thing is to clean the data, like all the genre, all details will be there. So once you've cleaned the data, then you're going to go perform analysis either using some tools. This is where we're going to focus on right now. We're going to focus on analysis and cleaning of data after this. So we're going to perform some analysis using some certain tools. And once it is done, we're going to have to visualize. So for each of these purpose, 1, 2, 3, 4, for all of these 4 purposes, we use different tools. To collect the data, we use different tools. To analyze the data, we use different tools. To visualize, we use different tools. For all of these, we use different tools. So let's take a look at them. Let's take a look at them and figure out what are the tools we use and what are the tools that are most important for us to learn. And I will give you a clear idea on which tool you can use, especially as open source and everything. All right. So first part, data collection. Now, here's what happens. Most data collection is done using certain software packages. We don't collect data manually, store them and everything. We use certain software packages. So I'm going to be going through the most common things one at a time. So when you talk about data, one of the common forms where every company provides data is in its Excel form. And this Excel form, since we are going through a huge amount of Excel data, we may need to clean the data in Excel itself. So for that purpose, one of the most important thing, I think one of the further sessions is already planned on Excel. So that is going to help you out to understand this in an even better way, But here's the most important thing that data analysts would require to perform. Data analysts would require to run basic queries, create different columns, create something called pivot tables or graphs and so on. So if you're not familiar with this, it's something that's hugely important for a data analyst in any form or way to perform a lot of, let's say, operations onto Excel. So one of the best things you can use Excel for is to create this, as well as to perform VBA. You can even use the concept of macro programming. If you're not familiar with it, it's basically like using certain files within Excel to write programs where you can use your conditional statements, loops, and everything. You can link different files and say that if this is the data in certain column, I want to have in a different column, the data changed to something different. So why exactly all of these are important? Think of this. A lot of cases, data may be provided in raw form. Like what I mean by raw form is, for climate, you may get something like, let's say, temperature or carbon emissions and all of these. So using these directly, you may not be able to perform a lot of analytics. You may need to change their formats. If it is directly in, let's say, from a simple thing, like if the data is in the wrong format, like wrong temperature, that is Kelvin or any wrong units, or if the carbon output emissions are having different date formats, because different countries use different date formats, different continents use different date formats. From these simple things to something more complicated, where some places they don't provide complete data, some data is missing. So if there are 100 days of data, one data is missing, what are you going to do? You're going to take the previous day's data, next day's data, make it an average and just put it there, because you want every day's data to predict. You don't want to skip any day. So all of these little things can be performed using these two methodologies, especially when it comes down to Excel. So as a data analyst, one of the important thing I would always suggest is Excel is a big important software. Now, Excel may not be open source because it is, of course, owned and licensed through Microsoft. There are other softwares available as well to perform this. But to calculate data using formula within spreadsheets, to run basic queries, create pivot tables, perform VBA macro programming, for all of this, Excel is a huge part for any data analyst. Now, before moving ahead, I'm going to go ahead to a couple of other software directly available. Now, there are a couple of special softwares which are directly available for data analysts who doesn't have to go to the nitty-gritty of coding. There's literally near to zero requirement of coding using certain software tools as well. And they are these are three hugely powerful tools. And the problem is they're all not free. Now, since all of you belong to a certain college, institute, or university, you can go for Tableau academic version, which is available. So all you need to do is go on to Tableau academic version page, send them a mail with an ID card of yours and some proof from your official university or college mail to tell them that this is the college or this is the university that I'm working in, and I would require so many licenses of Tableau academic version so that we can make use of it for us for research as well as our students to teach. If you just send a mail to them, they'll probably respond in a day or two. And a lot of people don't know this. The moment they go onto Tableau, they're like, you know what, there's this standard desktop version, there's this all these commercial versions. I won't be able to take any of these up. SPSS is also very costly. I won't be able to take up any of these. So we just tended to end up thinking like, you know what, I'll stick to Python or something, unless we're willing to spend. So there's a good thing that Tableau offers as an academic version, where they have a mail ID. If you go through Tableau's official website, you'll get to see that they have this mail ID where you can send a mail with your ID card from your official mail ID, stating that you're looking at using Tableau to teach students for a certain subject. You can even give the subject details and so on along with it. So once provided, they will approve it. So again, if you don't want to take too much time for approval, at the start itself, make sure you provide your ID card from your official mail ID, including the subject where you want to use it, including the subject where you want students to use it and everything. They'll provide some N 10, 20 number of IDs at least, so that you can use them for all the students as well as yourself as well. So with that, Tableau provides a complete visual hands-on approach, So it's so fun and interesting to work with Tableau. It really is fun and interesting, not just coding. There's literally zero coding required. You can import data directly from Excel, from SQL, from any online database as well. You can directly import any data. You can import from Apache's logs. You can import basically from everything. After importing, all your data which is there will be in a very well-defined visual format so that you can directly use it with a lot of already available buttons like perform correlation, put it in a map, all of these things. Like I'll give you a simple example. If there's a column in an Excel data called country, for example, it can be country, it can be city, it can be zip code, it can be anything, it can be any of it. If there's a column like this, it will automatically be able to put it in a world map and show you which part is where. You can put it in a different colored graph, everything. All of these visualizations are directly possible. You literally don't have to spend effort towards coding in any way whatsoever. This is one of the big advantages of it. So to everyone who wants to learn more into data analytics, wants to make like more progresses into it, Tableau academic version is definitely something that I would suggest. Even if you're planning for a career in, let's say, data analytics, or if you're planning for something like a research as well, to visualize the results and put it in the right way, Tableau is one of the best apps that I would suggest. We call these apps as BI apps, whether this or something called Power BI. All of these are called BI apps. BI basically means business intelligence, where we primarily in a major way use these apps to perform visualization from data, so that with this visualization we can share them to others, we can get insights and everything. So followed by this, the next sort of, again, cleaning and everything, all of these can be directly performed with this. And followed by this, the next couple of tools or couple of open source programming languages tools that I would always suggest is, hold on, kindly hold on. Yeah, that I would suggest is Python or R. Now you may get a question like, okay, which one should I use for? Like, let's say if I'm starting to learn, what exactly do I use? Do I use Python? Do I use R? Like, there seems to be a little confusion. So remember, here's where to use R and where to use Python. But first thing, before doing that, let me just point out, when a company is asking you for a visualized result, they really don't care about the fact that whether you're using Python, whether you're using R, whether you're using Tableau to provide that result. They just want the result in an accurate way so that they can take informed decisions. So in hindsight, you can say it really doesn't make much of a difference. It truly doesn't make much of a difference whether you're using Python, R, or Tableau to perform this. But remember, there are some data analysts, data scientists who particularly prefer Python. There are some who particularly prefer R. Now, why is that the case? Because Python and R are built for different purposes. Initially, they were built for different purposes. Python was built as a programming language, whereas R was built as a statistical computation system. So it is mainly used for statistical computing, whereas Python is used for mainly other purposes. So you can, even if you go through the website of R to download it, the first thing you will see is that it is developed by the statisticians for the statisticians or something like that. There's some statement that they have. I don't remember the exact thing, but you guys can give that a check if interested. So based on this, we get to see and realize like where exactly what is used for. So Python has a lot of packages available which can help you skip Excel directly, because you have certain data wrangling packages, things like pandas, which can directly import Excel data. And by importing these Excel data, you can use them within pandas in order to clean the data by using Python itself. Now, I'm very sorry. Please hold on for just a second. All right, so sorry for the slight delay of just a few seconds. So going back here, so as I was pointing out, so Python has a lot of packages which are directly available. So you can easily perform data cleaning, data wrangling, everything. Whereas R is mainly used for statistical analytics, where you have a lot of ways to visually represent. You have very good packages to visually represent the results, unlike Python. Of course, there are good packages in Python to visually represent. Like you have things like Seaborn, Matplotlib. I'll be going through each one of these in detail. But R also has a lot of things like, let's say, ggplot2 and so many other things to provide very good visual representation. But for any of us, I would always suggest to begin with Python, because we already are familiar with the syntax. Most of us already are familiar with the way it works, the syntax for it. So it wouldn't be difficult for us to directly continue ahead from it. So this is what I would personally suggest with. So if you're starting with Python, what is it that you're going to work on? What is it that you're going to begin with? So let's take a quick look at this. Let's take a quick look at what are the packages, what are the modules that I would need to know within Python. So one of the first thing, I think most of us are somewhat familiar with this, that is, when you talk about Python or R, remember, please remember, even R is hugely useful, especially if you want to visualize the data very well. I think you all have a session very soon, I think within a couple of days, on R as well, which is going to be highly beneficial for you to have a really good understanding on how to choose either one. But I will take a reference on Python mostly in our session for now. So when you talk about Python for data cleaning, you can use certain packages, and one of the best packages I would always suggest is Pandas. And a neat little trick that I would always suggest to everyone, like to all the people who are new to data analytics, to all the people who are new to all these packages and everything, one of the simple tips that I can always provide is go onto Google and just search Python Pandas cheat sheet. If you just search Python Pandas cheat sheet, you're going to get a PDF file where all the important functionalities, all the important functions, data types, everything that is there in Pandas will be listed over there with an example along with syntax, so that whichever one you want to know, you can directly go through it and understand. So this is something that we always keep as a copy. Because there's going to be hundreds and hundreds of packages that we're going to learn. We may forget some syntax. So it's always useful to have this particular cheat sheets of all of these different packages. So whichever package is there, most of the times you will be able to get a cheat sheet of it. So it's hugely beneficial if you ask me. So followed by cleaning using Pandas, the next thing is to perform analytics or to perform analysis. To perform analysis, there are various different techniques that we may use. We may use something like regression, and in the next few minutes, I'll be explaining after this, like which technique to use for what purpose in detail. So there are a lot of different techniques like regression, there's classification, there's clustering, there's deep learning, there's let's say active learning, there's reinforcement learning, there's transfer learning. So you may be confused, like which do I use? And even if you choose one of them, you may be confused, like which algorithm do I use? Because once you go for deep learning, you have ANN, you have DNN, you have CNN, you have RNN, you have LSTM. There are tens and tens of algorithms in each case. So even then we get confused, like which one do we use to perform our analysis? And when you choose one algorithm, then you need to finally fine tune it, because one algorithm directly won't be effective for every system, every or every scenario. One algorithm may not help well. So you need to fine tune your algorithm to fit your data in the right way. So that's also an important part that we keep looking at most often than not. So we're going to take a look at this, and to perform all of this, there are certain packages available in Python particularly. One of them is called stats models. It's my personal preferred favorite because it gives a lot of statistical data. Because every machine learning model that you're going to develop must be developed by some statistical information. So if you know that statistics, if you know the background statistics of it, then you can develop the machine learning model in an efficient way, so that your data analytics will be very, very efficient. So basically to improve accuracy. So along with stats models, you have some other things like scikit-learn, where you can implement a lot of, let's say, machine learning algorithms, including regression and classification, clustering. All of them are available within this and within stats models as well. Then along with it, if you want to go for deep learning, we generally go for TensorFlow. Now, going through TensorFlow itself is slightly difficult, because TensorFlow initially is kind of complicated and difficult to understand, because we have to set a lot of things. We have to create a lot of parameters and assign them. If you want to make it easy, there's a wrapper for TensorFlow called Keras. So this is a wrapper package for TensorFlow, which includes TensorFlow. And this works on top of TensorFlow to make it easy for you as a programmer to create machine learning models using, let's say, things like deep learning techniques particularly. So Keras is something that I would always prefer instead of directly TensorFlow, because it makes our programming easy while using the exact same code of TensorFlow underneath it. Then once you've gone through all of this, if you want to go one step ahead, if you want to work on transfer learning and everything, there is BERT code available. I have one question is, can we use Google Colab as an alternative? Okay, towards Google Colab isn't a package, but Google Colab is an IDE. Now, I would always prefer Google Colab or Azure or Amazon or something like this. Now, I'm going to explain in just a little while why I prefer this. See, think of this. We don't have supercomputers at our house, especially as researchers, faculty members, or students, or working professionals. We won't have supercomputers to work through. So if you want to do some research data, let's say on some climate data and everything, you're basically taking 200 years of data. And for a machine learning model to be built and everything, it may take a lot of RAM. It may take a huge amount of RAM. So if you use your own computer, let's say, for instance, your memory may fail at some point of time, and your code may not be able to continue, and your code won't be so quick enough to run as well. So what is the alternative? How can I use a supercomputer or something like that? How can you use a better computer? So there's something called Google Colab that's available. I hope many of you are familiar with this. So what Google Colab does is, it gives you an online IDE, online integrated development environment, where you can write your programs. You can write your complete Python programs, save the files. It's basically as an IPYNB format. Basically, in other words, interactive Python notebook format. So in this, you can upload files, you can download files, you can write code, you can install packages using pip command, you can change the versions, you can perform all of these operations, and you can add files, download files, all of these can be done. And this online IDE is generally created using very fast computers, which has 32 GB of RAM, 64 GB of RAM, and so on. And they have T100 or P4 graphic cards, which are basically very, very powerful. They're really powerful. So they can run the code in like 2 minutes, which your computer may take something like 30 minutes, basically. So this is why for data analyzing, data science, I would always prefer Google Colab. And one thing that you guys need to know, Google Colab has these two options. I'll just pause the share for just a minute so I can show this in Google Colab, especially for those who are working on data science. If you really want to, let's say, work through this, I'll just show this very quickly. Right, so I have a few notebooks. I think I have them. So I'll just take something like, let's say this, just to show you some content. So for those who want to work through Google Colab, get this little clue, get this little idea, and work well. So you can add content to your Google Drive and directly use that. So whatever you have added to Google Drive, you can directly use it and connect it. And one thing here is that you get to know here, you have this in runtime, you have this option called change runtime type. Here you have two options, none, GPU, and TPU. If you need a TPU, you can select TPU, mainly for TensorFlow. If you need a GPU, mainly for deep learning and everything, which requires graphics processing, you can use GPU. Otherwise, you can use none. This will give you mainly CPU-based acceleration. This will give you graphics card based, this will give you TPU based. Now, depending on your purpose, you can choose one. Don't use GPU and TPU for everything because it doesn't really make much of a difference for every purpose. It only makes a difference for certain purposes, like when you want to use deep learning, transfer learning, only then it makes sense to use them. Otherwise, it really makes no sense. If you directly keep using them always, then Google will not allow you to use it anymore in the future. So generally keep it at none, save it, continue working with it, and whenever you need it, you can use it. So you can use like hundreds and hundreds of rows of data, you can use like thousands and thousands of rows of data and perform all your analytics to like show the results and everything over here live. So this is one thing that you can use and perform. So this is something I use most of the times because I can just add the code directly and run it. Just remember, even if you close it, it still runs. But the only difference is when you close it, it has a limited time, like 40 minutes, 45 minutes or something. Within that, you still have to open and see once. So if you're running a very large program, I would prefer to always keep it running in your mobile phone, at least in a browser. So you can just keep that page open now and then or something like that. I have one question before I go ahead. Can we use Keras and TensorFlow in Colab for training CNN model? Yes. What Google Colab does is most of the data scientist and data analyst required packages that are there, whether it is, let's say, something like sklearn, TensorFlow, Keras, all of them are inbuilt. You don't have to worry about them. All of them are inbuilt. You don't have to install them separately. So that is where you really don't have to spend a lot of effort to work through this and directly use them. So that's the major advantage. Right. Now, I have one question. What exactly is TPU? TPU stands for Tensor Processing Unit. So you can basically use these for all your deep learning, especially when you're using, let's say, TensorFlow. So a single board of TPU, especially things like NVIDIA, has these TPU, that is Tensor Cores, Tesla Tensor Cores released, which will help your entire, how do I say, TensorFlow processing become way too fast. So it will be at least tens and tens of times faster than how you would work through in your local computer. At Unisys Cushion, it's basically this huge company which develops graphic cards and hardware devices. So they are the ones who develop these TPUs as well. Most commonly used TPUs, which are called NVIDIA Tesla. Tesla has graphic cards as well and TPUs as well. So it depends on what we can use. So without buying all these hardware, you can directly use them using Google Colab. But if you really want to take much more power, if you really want to take much more power, like 56 GB of RAM and like 16 GB of graphic card, all of these things. If you want much more power, you can of course go for Microsoft Azure or Amazon Web Services, or even paid version of Google Colab as well. So all of these are available as options for data scientists, researchers, where we in our country, where we in generally in our days will always end up thinking like, I don't have such a fast and powerful computer to perform analysis. How am I going to do that? So Colab is one of the best ways to always do that. That is one suggestion that I always provide. But anyway, let's move ahead from that over to the next. The next few packages that are hugely available, as we were pointing out, you have R here. So followed by this, the next few packages that you have is one more thing called SAS or SAS. Different people call it in a different way. So it's one of the most widely used software package available, mainly used for statistical analysis. Statistical analysis, as the name would suggest. So a lot of statistical analysis are inbuilt within it. You can just click, drag and drop and perform this. Mostly we use it as a command line thing itself, but you can directly implement algorithms and everything. So you don't have to really worry much about code. You can directly implement algorithms. So as a tidbit, something a lot of us may not know, IBM has their own version called Watson, which is a fantastic online platform which anybody can use. So I'm not, I think Watson Lite account is still free, if I'm not wrong. If anyone is really interested, you can check these out. Watson Lite accounts are free, where you can directly go through and take up data, import data within them. And you don't have to write the code. IBM Watson itself will implement the correct algorithm with fine tuning and give you the results. So it's an amazing thing that is developed by IBM. If anyone's really interested, you can also give that a check because it's a light version is pretty much freely available for something like forever, I think, if I'm not wrong. So along with Excel for data collection, data saving, we also have SQL a lot of the times and all of these things. So and these are some initial basic software that I would always suggest a data analyst to go through. Initial tools that I would always suggest a data analyst to go through. Now, let's forget about tools for a little while, and let's take a look at what are the skills we need to know. It's fine, we can use all these tools and everything, but what are the skills I need separately if I want to be a good data analyst? That's the next question that comes up to our mind. So take a look at this. I'll just quickly erase these. Right, now, just to point this out, remember, a data analyst, I'm very sorry for this, kindly hold on. Yeah. Data analytics and data science are very closely related. So what exactly comes within data science in that case? Within data science, you have this thing called artificial intelligence. And within artificial intelligence, you have a smaller part of it, like a subset, you can say, of artificial intelligence called machine learning. And within machine learning, you have a subset of it again called deep learning. So all of these are interrelated in this way. So if you want to work on, let's say, data analytics, you need knowledge about artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning as well. These are some skills that we need. And what are the skills that I need if I want to work on AI, if I want to work on ML, if I want to work on DL? What are the skills I need for that? So that is the main thing we're going to take a look at. So before going through that, I just want to ask one little question to everyone. There is one very small question. Is everyone familiar with the skills required to learn ML, deep learning, transfer learning and everything? Or shall we go through it, let's say, from, how do I say, from a little basics? So, okay, a short brief of them. Perfect, we'll do that, no problem, not an issue. So before we go on to AI, ML and deep learning and everything, just remember, deep learning is a subset of machine learning. Machine learning is a subset of artificial intelligence. Let us quickly take a look at what exactly these are under a minute or two, so we can directly take a look at what are the skills we need, right? So many of you are saying that, yes, we can go through them in brief. For sure, we'll do that. So one of the first things we need to know, data analytics mainly deals with cleaning data and visualizing data, right? So along with cleaning and visualizing, whenever you want to analyze data, we generally go for these techniques. Now, what are these techniques and why is this a subset of these? So artificial intelligence, as we know, is to make a computer program, is basically to make a computer program which can use its own intelligence, or which can use its own deductive capabilities and make some informed decisions or come up with some results, which can use its own fake, or not exactly fake, we can say its own type of intelligence, and find out solutions to certain problems, or perform descriptive analytics, predictions, whatever it could be. So since it's basically a computer program which can take some previous data, learn from that data, and learning from, let's say, previous data, and perform some analytics, like provide solutions to certain questions asked by itself, you can see that, you can see how machine learning is actually a part of it. Because machine learning algorithms, so machine learning models, any of them that we develop, what's the point of them? What's the purpose of them? Each machine learning algorithm or each machine learning model that we develop, the basic purpose of it is to take some input data and perform some prediction of output data. So aren't we taking previous data to find out something new from it using an intelligent technique? Of course. So that is why machine learning is basically a subset of artificial intelligence. And from this, the next thing is your deep learning, which is an advancement in machine learning and everything. So let's take a look at this in detail, because as a data analyst and as a data scientist, it's not only about cleaning and visualizing, it's also about being able to analyze using certain advanced techniques, which are also what data scientists work on. Now, to be an expert in machine learning, to be an expert in data analytics or data science or anything, there are three things that we need to know. One thing is not enough. I'm just pointing this out. There are three things that we really need to know well. One is a programming language. Let's say it could be Python or R or any of them. This is one of the important first basic thing. The next thing is statistics. So you may see and observe, like wonder, like why a lot of people who have MSc in mathematics, BSc in mathematics go for data scientist or data analyst like courses and everything. That's because they already have good knowledge in statistics. They can easily go for that. Any machine learning algorithm you go through. So any machine learning algorithm, whether it is something like naive Bayes algorithm, for example, or even something like simple regression model, or any classification algorithm like SVM, whatever algorithm it is, all of them depend on statistics. If we don't know statistics, if we don't know how to work with an algorithm, if we don't know how that algorithm works, how we can change it, how we can fine tune it, there's not much point in learning only the code. So this is a hugely important part. Naive Bayes algorithm works on the concept of probability. So we need to learn how exactly probability works and how is that effective in this, and how we can modify this algorithm once we are able to learn, or how we can modify our own model once we are able to learn probability. Regression works based on a concept called OLS, that is called ordinary least squares. So that's also statistical. SVM also works based on statistical methods as well. All of them use these statistical methods. This also uses the same concept where we calculate the differences. So all of these use concepts of statistics. So along with programming language, one of the most important things that we need to know and work with is statistics. Once we're good with statistics, then the final thing. Now, what else is required? You may be wondering, what else would I need to learn? I know programming language, I know statistics. I should be able to be a good data analyst or a data scientist. What else do I really need to know? Think of this. Is there scope of data science, data analytics for mechanical engineers? Is there scope of data science or data analysts for healthcare professionals? Can they learn it and use it in their own domain? Take this scenario. One case, diagnosis of some diseases. Can a healthcare professional who has good knowledge in this domain, as well as good knowledge in coding, create certain tools to make automated diagnosis? Can a person who has good knowledge in, let's say, car designing, use the same for a company like Mercedes to create really good systems or intelligent systems which can identify which is the right or which is the um, right height for a car, which is the right streamlined design for a car and everything? Yes, as Kishore rightly pointed out, it's your domain knowledge. So it's a combination of all three. It's not just one of them. So you require a programming language, you require statistics behind it to work with it, and you require domain knowledge in order to work on a particular domain of data. I can definitely not work on, let's say, Mercedes data if they just give me things like, let's say, the car data Excel file. I will not know what to do with it. I will not know what to figure out, what to correlate. I won't know anything. I will not be able to make head or tails of it. But if you give me a data on my domain, I will be able to do it. So one of the important things that's also needed is domain knowledge. So these three together are the skills required to make you a good data analyst or a data scientist. So now let us go on. And since we got to know how or what are the skills required, what I want to focus on is how can we learn these skills? Like, what do I need to do to learn all these skills? Like, what do I need to do in order to work through all of them? Now, or if you have already started learning, are we in the right path? Are we in the right way and everything? So that is one thing that I just want to point out. Now, here's the simple thing to everyone. Now, when you talk about machine learning, there are different techniques. The techniques like, let's say, regression. The techniques like classification, clustering, let's say. Then there are other techniques along with this that are deep learning, let's say active learning, reinforcement learning, and just one more is left. And finally, transfer learning. Now, which one do I use? Which one do I particularly work with in my scenario? Like, what exactly am I supposed to do? So, to answer all of this, first, let me ask one small question again, because the content that I want to put out is going to be purely dependent on the current knowledge level of all of us, because I really don't want to do something which all of you are already very familiar with, all of you already know really well. So I always want to take up something new. So one thing, let me just ask you guys very quickly. So in here, are you all familiar with, let's say, all of these techniques, or shall we take a look at which one is used where so that we can have a better idea on how to learn them and how to use them? So you can come up with your response, and you can definitely let me know over chat so that I can either go through these algorithms by specifying which one would be used where and so on. So I'm getting a couple of responses. I would request as many of you to please do respond as possible, so they can definitely try to help and guide and like work through like figuring out like which one we can use for which real world let's say scenarios and so on. All right, perfect. So mainly most of us are requiring like what is deep learning, what is transfer learning. So this is what most of us want to learn about. So no problems. So what we'll do is go through deep learning and transfer learning in detail, so that we can have a really good idea on like how they work, what they work. Okay, deep learning, transfer learning, and reinforcement learning. All right, we'll take a look at these three in detail. So let's go ahead here. Now, first thing, just to remember, regression is mainly used for your numerical data, where you want to predict a number, like what will be the number of COVID cases in 1 month, what will be my stock price within 1 month, what will be human population within 10 years, what will be the carbon emissions within 10 years, what will be the temperature within India within 20 years. All of these numeric predictions, we go for regression. Then when it comes down to classification and clustering, we use these machine learning algorithms for mainly different purposes. Clustering is done to group things together. Netflix does it, Amazon does it, Spotify does it. Why do they do it? To group categories together which can be recommended to you for purchase. If you're buying a mobile phone, they're going to group together along with it things like headphones as well. So all of these, how do they group together? Using clustering algorithms. When you go for classification, it is mainly used for labeling purpose. I'm not going to go in depth within this because most of us are requesting to go through these four in detail. So that's what I'll go through. So that's why I'm just going to take a very simple example. So when you talk about labels, what we mean is, let's say for a simple thing, results as yes or no, like results as something like label. So what I mean to say here is, in regression, you predict the exact number ahead. If it's stock prediction, you predict whether my current investment is 100 rupees, whether it's going to go to 110, whether it's going to go remain at 100, whether it's going to go down to 90. It's going to predict the exact value. Whereas in classification, if you give the data, your prediction will be, will there be profit? How much profit? You don't know. It's just to classify, will there be profit? Will there be loss? Or will there be nothing? So just classifying it in this way. So this is where we use classification more and more. So with this idea, we've just seen a couple of examples. That's it. Basically, nothing much else of where what is used. Let's take a look at the important things. Where do we use these, and how exactly does that work? Right. Now, first things first. In a simple classification technique, I'll just to understand, to show the difference, I'll not take too much time. I'll just give you this very small thing. So I think the chat window can be kept for mainly for any questions, doubts, queries, so that hopefully people won't get distracted. I hope that's all right, and I hope that's all right with everyone. So let's take this simple scenario. Now, why am I taking this scenario? Let me just explain very, very quickly. Think of this. In a simple machine learning, that is classification algorithm. Let's say you want to figure out whether your stock price is going to increase or decrease. Just go positive or negative. So there's going to be only two conditions. Somewhere in some cases, it will be positive. These are your individual data points in previous days, previous years, when it has been positive, when it has been negative, and so on. In some cases, there will be negative. So something like this. So there are always going to be some outliers like this, where some cases negative will go to the other side, some cases positive will go to the other side in this classification. So I'm representing this as a 2D model using a simple linear graph. But remember, in reality, it can be 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional, it can be an n-dimensional model. But when we want to represent it, we generally represent it in 2D. So in reality, it can be n-dimensional. So that is where your classification algorithms like SVM have a good advantage, because they change, let's say, things like dimensions to get you a better result. Now, to understand that, take a look at this. We have a linear row of data where you have something like this. Now, is there any way where I can classify this using a single line? Is there any way where we can classify this in the perfect way between negative and positive? Is there any way to do that using a line? Absolutely no. Right. So what SVM does basically is it converts your whatever dimensions are there. This is one-dimensional. It converts your n-dimensional system into n plus one-dimensional system basically. So 1D system is going to get converted to 2D system, where you will be able to see these points like this. And it makes it much easier to perform your classification between positive and let's say negative values. So this is the major advantage when it comes down to simple classification techniques. But when we go for deep learning techniques, in deep learning techniques, we hear things like artificial neural networks, dense neural networks, and all of this. So now comes the question, what exactly is deep learning? Like, what is it? How do I work with it? So the basic idea of deep learning is to create a system which will mimic a brain. This is the main purpose. It is to mimic the brain. So as rightly pointed out, it's inspired by neurons. As we think of something, neurons get fired in our brain, right? They fire up, they charge up, and they basically used. So in that case, to mimic the brain's simulation, or to simulate the working of a brain and perform, let's say, classification or regression, whatever it is, we use deep learning techniques. So in short, why exactly is it important? Because as data increases, I'll just try to show this as a graph so that we can understand. As data increases, accuracy should also increase. But in traditional machine learning techniques, as data increases to a point, accuracy increases, then it falls flat. It doesn't increase anymore. But when it comes to deep learning, as data increases, your accuracy also, or performance also, keeps on increasing. So this is something that has been calculated using tens and thousands of research papers already. So that is why we basically use this. And even with the less amount of data or more amount of data, more computations, you get better results. Better results is always what we look for. Better results is always what we work through. Now, in this case, I have, yes, absolutely right. So in this case, as one of you have rightly pointed out, see, remember this, deep learning is basically machine learning where you have multiple layers. Generally, we have greater than 2 layers, minimum something like 3-4 layers and so on. And each layer has a purpose. Your first layer will receive data. After first layer receives data, it will perform some computation within the inner layer, and it will perform one more computation in one more inner layer. And each layer you add, you're increasing the complexity. You're making it more and more complex, just like a brain. So this is the main purpose of it, to add layers. Now there are different kinds of layers within it, things like activation layer, and so on. There's a lot of different types of layers. So just to point out, in short, I'm just going to write this, I'm just going to state this. For each data input that you give, it will be received. I'll just point out, it will be received differently in an inner layer. And the more layers you have, the more your data will be received in different ways. So that means the more you can have different weightage in your case. So for each different type of input, if you have different kind of weightage, It can understand for different kinds of inputs what should be the exact weightage to use. So this is where you're optimizing your entire system. So what algorithms are there in that case to work through, let's say, deep learning? So these are the following algorithms which we use most of the times. We have artificial neural networks, we have recurrent neural networks, and we have LSTM. Now, I'm not going to go in depth within them because my main idea is to take you through the concept of transfer learning, mainly because that's the big thing right now. That's the huge thing that is going on since the last 1 or 2 years. So let's quickly take a look at this. Now, here you have dense neural networks, convolution neural networks, and everything. So when we talk about this, when we take a look at this, remember, convolution neural networks are what we use generally for image classification purposes. Whatever you want to identify within an image, you want to identify face, you want to recognize and detect objects and everything. So for all of these, we use convolution neural networks because it is specifically made for that purpose. It is specifically made for vision and image classification purpose. Whereas your ANN and DNN are the basic versions on top of which the rest are developed. RNN is often used for text analytics purposes. So basically, when you want to use speech recognition or things like sentiment analysis and everything, this is where you generally go for recurrent neural networks. Followed by this, there's something new that has come up a few years ago that is called LSTM, which stands for long short term memory. Now, why would I want to use this algorithm? Why would I want to create a model of LSTM? What exactly is the point of it? Simple. The point of it is, think of this. I'm going to take a huge sentence, like, for example, Jack is, sorry guys, let's say Jack is going to a shop and all of those things, and I'll write here, he is finding a nice shirt and he is buying that shirt. That's it. Now, if you ask a recurrent neural network algorithm, who is buying the shirt, it will say he, because recurrent neural network doesn't remember the large distance things. It forgets them. It only remembers whatever is closest to it. So it has basically this property to forget immediately whatever is farther away, because it thinks that it's not so relevant. It's not as relevant as what is close by. So if you ask a neural network system what is bought, or sorry, who buys a shirt, it says he buys a shirt, not Jack buys a shirt. Whereas if you use LSTM on the other hand, LSTM remembers who is he? He was previously referred to as Jack. That means Jack is buying the shirt. We'll be able to correlate much more in detail. So whenever we go for longer paragraph, lengthier data in terms of text and everything, it's always preferred to use LSTM rather than RNN. It definitely provides better result. So that is the one little thing that we just need to know and be familiar with. So if you ever wonder, like, if I want to use a deep learning technique for some real world problem, which one should I use? If I want to use deep learning technique for any problem, let's say, for example, speech recognition or computer vision, you have a good idea of which one to use as of now. So that's pretty clear. So along with it, you can also use ANN for various regression techniques as well. That's always available. So a lot of financial institutes, a lot of companies particularly use these sort of deep learning techniques to create, many of you may have heard of this, algorithmic day trading systems. So algorithmic day trading systems isn't basically for stock trading purposes and investment purposes. A lot of companies do that. And even a lot of companies create their own chatbots. You never know whether you're texting in a customer support to an actual person or a chatbot, because a chatbot will look at your words, whatever you have typed. If you say, I need help with a certain thing, it'll look at those important words and respond accordingly. So you'll never know which one is being whether you're talking to a real human or a chatbot. All of those are again done with RNN and LSTM. I have one question. Will CNN, GNN be suitable for disease diagnosis given medical images as input? That is where I would prefer CNN, convolution neural network. But when we go for transfer learning, you will understand that it's a much better method, especially for disease diagnosis for medical images, because I'll tell you why. Think of this. Let me go for your particular example. Medical images. Is it easy to get a lot of data in medical images? Is it easy to get a huge amount of data when it comes down to medical images? Absolutely no. That is where we struggle. A lot of researchers who go through this particularly struggle because it's not easy to get a huge amount of data when it comes down to medical images. So when you look at RNN, or sorry, when you look at CNN and everything, you need good amount of data in order to make the prediction, because it needs to learn what is the edges in the image, what are the different things in the image, all of this it needs to know. So without knowing all of that, without knowing segmentation and all those things, with a small set of images, it's going to be very, very difficult to get good accuracy. So we need to use some different techniques for that. That is where transfer learning, active learning, everything comes up, which I'll explain. Now, since I hope we're clear with the basics of deep learning, from this, we're going to take a look at what is particularly transfer learning and active learning. Now think of this. Let me ask all of you one simple question. Medical images, like something like, let's say, cancer detection or something like that. Let's take such a scenario. Now, first up, is it, let's say, is it cheap or is it costly for me to hire a doctor and ask the doctor to manually label the data? Because if, as we all know, we need in machine learning training data. We need training data to teach the machine learning algorithm or to teach the machine learning model. In training data, we need input as well as output. That means if there's an image of, let's say, a person's X-ray or something like that, then I need an output whether that person has certain disease or not. The output also is needed. This is how my machine learning model will understand and learn, because it has input as well as output. Next time I give just an input, it will figure out what should be the output accordingly. Now, in that case, when you have, let's say, certain data, this is my first question to you guys. Let's say we have like 1,000 or 10,000 images of, let's say, X-ray images, for instance. So is it going to be costly for you to hire a doctor and ask the doctor to go through 10,000 images and classify them as non-risky, slightly risky, medium risk, high risk for a particular disease to predict whether certain disease could happen? What do you think? Is it going to be an expensive task, or is it going to be a completely non-expensive task? It's going to be a hugely expensive task, of course. It's going to take a lot of money from our pockets. So how can we make this less costly? How can we make labeling less costly? Or how can we make labeling less, or how can we make labeling, in other words, quicker, faster by taking less cost? That is where active learning comes up. Think of this. Out of these 10,000 images which are already there, you're asking the doctor to only classify 1,000 images, to only label 1,000 images. And based on that 1,000 images, you're going to create a machine learning model which has 1,000 inputs and 1,000 outputs already. Now, will it be as good as taking 10,000 rows of data as input? Absolutely no. But will it at least be good? Yes. So since it will at least be good enough, this particular model is created. Once this particular model is created, the next 1,000 data, whatever it is taken for testing. So let's say next 1,000 data, I will represent here as 5 or 6 data taken for testing. So when the model is developed, it will create a, let's say, classifier. All right. So when this classifier is created, you'll have some things which are positive on one side. I'll just take a smaller size. Right here, let's say plus. Yep. I think the feedback link will be shared by the college side in just a little while. So I request you guys to please wait for that. I hope that's all right. Right. So I'm just going to take some small example here. And I'm going to take, let's say, some minus values here and here. Now, if you observe, this is our training data. Based on our training data, we have performed some testing. So in that testing, can I say this is in the wrong position and this is in the wrong position? Of course, right? We can visualize and say that this and this is in the wrong position. How do we say that it's in the wrong position? See, think of this. After taking first 1,000 rows of data to train your model will have certain knowledge. Next, if you give one more image, it will predict whether it is low risk or high risk of a disease using certain confidence level. It will say, I'm 90% sure that it's high risk, or I'm 80% sure it is low risk, and everything. So if the model says certain image is 90% sure that it is high risk, then it definitely belongs farther away from the boundary. If a model says I'm 51% sure it is high risk, then it comes very close to the border, because this is the border that will be divided between your negative and positive, or let's say low risk and high risk, or something like that. So if it is 51% positive, then this data is like very difficult for our model to analyze. So what active learning does is, active learning is going to take these sort of data. Active learning is going to take wherever it is having low confidence levels. Only these images are then sent back to the user, so that user can manually annotate it, user can manually label it. So only these images are sent back to the doctor, because according to the model, these images are confusing. The model cannot, how do I say, classify it with high accuracy. The model is not classifying it like, you know what, I'm pretty sure that according to 90% accuracy, it's going to be of high risk. No, it is saying 51% accuracy. It is very close to the boundary. So that is when that image is sent back to the user, who can send only these images to the doctor and have them analyzed by the doctor again. Once it is done, maybe somewhere around 200 images are sent instead of 1,000, which is lesser. Once that is done, those 200 images are sent back. Remember, initially 1,000 images were already there. So whatever the rest 1,000 were tested, out of these, according to the model, 800 it could predict accurately, but 200 images, it has confusions. Its accuracy level is low. So these 200 are sent back to the user, who sends it to the doctor, who analyzes it, gives back the result, and these 1,000 images, whatever they are, 800 which the model is automatically analyzing with good accuracy, and 200 which it couldn't, are now added as 1,000 extra rows of data to your machine learning model as input. Once that is done, it now has 2,000 rows of data, for which you take the next 1,000 rows of data and repeat the process. This is where number of labeling, or number of let's say input data, that is medical images labeled, is reduced. So doesn't this make it less expensive? What do you guys think? This is where my question comes to you guys. Don't you think it makes it less expensive? Because we're not giving every image, we're not giving every single image to, let's say, the user back in order to perform this. So it does make it more efficient in terms of labeling. Only in terms of cost effectiveness is what we are talking about. All right. Now, Okay, I have one question. How do you train multimodal data? Is it already if we go through multimodal data training as an example immediately after transfer learning? Because we've just learned active learning and it'll be easy for us to immediately differentiate since we have just learned this. What will be the difference between active learning and transfer learning? I hope that's all right. So, perfect. Now, let's take a look at this very, very quickly. Now, first thing, in transfer learning, on the other hand, let's say in case of active learning, you have enough images, you have 10,000 images, but your labeling is the expensive task. But in case of transfer learning, instead of labeling being the expensive task, the problem is you don't have high number of images at all. You really don't have high number of images. You may have something like just 100 images. Is that good enough to create a model? Do we really think that using 100 images we can create a really good model? Absolutely no. Absolutely no. So when it's very difficult for creating, let's say, using just a small amount of images, what we do is use a concept called transfer learning. Think of this. I have my X-ray images, which are only 100. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a model which is going to differentiate between cats and dogs. Now you may ask, like, why on earth are we doing this? It makes absolutely no sense. It makes absolutely no sense compared to X-ray. So we have only 100 images. Agreed, correct. But why exactly are we using cats and dogs images over here to perform, let's say, analytics in this case? What's the purpose of it? Here's the simple thing. Using cats and dogs images to classify, you're training your model to learn about how to segment images, how to identify edges, how to identify these features of an image. With the knowledge of how to identify these features, it can perform classification with just 100 images as training data in a much better way. So this is where we use transfer learning. We are training the model on one, let's say we are giving the knowledge to the model on one domain, and we are trying to test on a different domain, either by freezing last layer or something like that. That is what we generally do. So this is what is called transfer learning. Take one more instance. Let's take text analytics. Now, if I give transfer learning 2000 books of data, it will get to understand which word is related to what, which word is closely related to what. It will identify all these. So in that case, even if I have very small amount of data to perform analytics, if I that is to perform training for sentiment analysis, for example, with that small amount of data, it will work well, mainly because it already knows information about English language because it has learned from 2000 books. Now it can apply in sentiment analysis. This is where the concept of transfer learning is used. You basically train the model on one domain and transfer that model to classify on a different domain by adding some extra training data at the end, like one more layer of data or something like that. One more layer of data for the final transfer, final classification model. So this is how we basically work through transfer learning. And this is the big thing that is going on right now. So if you're interested in learning more about this, Google has released BERT, which is a transfer learning model, which has, there are a lot of already pre-trained transfer learning model. What this means is they're already trained on data before. If it's on image, they're already trained on some image data. If it's on text, they're already trained on text data. You can take that pre-trained model and you can perform your analysis, whether it is image classification or a sentiment analysis, whatever it could be. You can perform this with much higher accuracy by using small amount of training data, because it doesn't require much training data whatsoever. So this is the new thing that is going on. This is the biggest trend that is currently going on. So if anyone wants to go through research areas, this is what I would suggest to use as technique. So I hope that was basically important, like useful. I have one more question. Yes, it is definitely available for medical image diagnosis as well. But the thing is, remember, your transfer learning model will not be trained on medical images. It will be trained on something else. It will be trained on cloud classification or flower classification or something like that. You can use that data, which will help your model understand better how to segment images, how to identify features of images, and you can add your data, your medical data, whatever it is, as the last layer of this transfer learning model and create your own model, which works for medical image diagnosis system. So going ahead, I had one more question which I am yet to answer. That is, let me just see the question. I think I've forgotten the question that was asked. How to train multimodal data? Absolutely right. That was the question. So when we talk about multimodal data, you may think that your data can be of different forms. Your input data may be text, your input data may be images, your input data may be videos, all of this, or your input data may be combination of all of this. Now, especially when it's a combination of all of this, how are we gonna like perform analysis? We need to figure some way out. So the best way to do it is individually extract. I'll just point this out. Individually extract features from all of this in your own format. You can put it up in your own format. Once it is, each feature is individually extracted, you need to aggregate these features. Once they are aggregated, then this aggregated feature data set can then be used, because otherwise it will be very difficult to take this text data which will be in different format, this image data which is in different format, and this video data which is in different format. Now it's going to be highly difficult for us to immediately work through, like figuring out like how exactly we can do this in short. But I'll give you a very small example, because this again depends on case by case scenario, example by example scenario. Let's say we want to take two different sources of data, two different models of data. Let's say we have an image and we have a text. All right. Now the text is like something like, where is the let's say cat. This is the text. And there's an image where there are different objects like there's a fence here, and behind the fence there's a cat. It doesn't look like a cat, but let's assume it is a cat. All right. So this text, I have to take this and extract features out of this text using a different machine learning system, possibly using RNN or possibly using LSTM or something like that. So using LSTM, I'll use it. So then I'll get to understand that what we are trying to figure out is, where is the cat? So once we figure that out, we are going to take this image later on. To analyze image, I need to use CNN. So using CNN, then I'm going to give the input from here. Like basically, we're using both of these in combination. I'm taking result of this LSTM and result of CNN. So CNN gives me the result by identifying objects. It says there's a fence and there's a cat. The fence is in front, the cat is in behind. So it gives all this information here. Once I get the result of CNN, once I get the result of LSTM, then I can get the question, where is the cat? Is the cat there? Yes. Where is it? It's behind the fence. That's why you can then give a response like, the cat is behind the fence. So this is just a simple example I'm taking just for us to understand how we can use LSTM and CNN together to take up text as well as image data. So these are how you can work through it. So just to summarize before we go ahead, in data analytics, we basically have all these tools that we use, which we have discussed about. You have structured data, unstructured data, that is basically SQL images and everything. We have gone through that. We have taken a look at machine learning in detail and seen, we have seen what kind is used where. We have taken a look at deep learning, active learning, and transfer learning particularly. And when it comes to research areas, it purely depends on which one you want to go for. If you want to go for research area within, you have something like medical images and or text analytics and everything, or stock market analytics, you need to use different techniques. So that is where you need to figure out which technique you're going to use where. And career roles, as we have learned initially, you can go for data analyst, you can go for data scientist, any of these. So I hope today's session was very beneficial for you to get an introduction to data analytics and everything. So I have one question before I go ahead. Kindly suggest some websites to learn CNN and transfer learning to carry out with implementation. I would always suggest things like Medium towards data science, and yeah, Analytics Vidya. These are three really good websites that I would suggest. Anyone can go through them, search for any machine learning algorithm if you want to learn in detail about it with any domain data and everything. You'll be getting a lot of coding with examples. But if you're going through any machine learning algorithm, please don't learn just the code of it. Please learn the statistics behind it. Please learn the intuition, in other words, behind the algorithm first, then go for the code of the algorithm. Don't try to learn the algorithm without learning the statistics or intuition or any of it. So with this, I hope I was able to answer each and everyone's questions in detail. And I hope the whole session was very interesting and informative to all of you. I thank CIIT first up to give me the opportunity to be the presenter for this first session on Introduction to Data Analytics. And I hope this gives you a really good idea on where you can go ahead with this and where you can continue like your research area, career, what technologies, what tools to work